that's basically what we're talking about here. Sun activity, solar maximum, things that we've been tracking on our website, Will, for quite a long time now as well. And there's a great deal of concern, obviously, that this might be a catalyst of throwing human society into a total different area. We've had warnings coming out from NASA, other organizations as well, about the increased solar activity. And the question is if we, human society overall, cannot know what we're in for and what the potential effects of increased sun activity might mean. Will, what do you think?
Well, what it could mean, especially if we get X-class solar flares and coronal mass ejections, and they'd have to be facing the Earth. So there's a few things that has to happen. But if it were to face the Earth, and we got bombarded with all of these, with the X-rays, with all of the solar energy, with the really high energy particles, basically a very simple thing would happen. And what we need to start thinking about now is, what are we going to do with the power grid? Can we prepare? Because it actually takes, when the space weather scientists are constantly monitoring the sun, it takes a day or two for the impact to hit the Earth. But what we could be talking about is a complete blackout of the grid, because we're an electromagnetic civilization and nobody thought about it to begin with, but the sun really controls it. And all we need is one blast, and civilization's ended that simply. We don't need a whole bunch of natural disasters, just one blast from the sun. And since we're in a solar maximum right now, which isn't due to end until the end of 2012 or early 2013, we've got to be really concerned.
There is a number of factors included into this, of course. We have cometary bodies coming in. We want to talk about that. We also have, if we backtrack a little bit more than Will and talk about the misconception behind 2012, the idea as 2012 has become associated with doomsday, end of the world kind of thing. But what you're looking at here in your latest article is basically that this idea, this concept, is something that we potentially can apply to 2011, coming now in just about a month away, not that long now. Where this is something that's very recently, and talk about that, Will, and then obviously tie it into to why and what is going on here in September, basically.
Well, basically, when people got a hold of this concept of 2012, very few people understand the Mayan calendar. I just happened to have spent a year in Mexico studying all of the pyramids, all of the ancient sites, and I ended up in the very southern part of Mexico with a tribe that still lives like the ancient Maya did. And so I got very deeply into the calendar system, and I really wanted to try to decode it. But it took me 25 years. It didn't start happening until about 2002. I started to really understand what they were talking about, what they meant by, because they had a system they called the four suns, which meant ages, long periods of time, in which each one lasts about 5,100 years, and then a civilization, a certain type of civilization, ends, like the Pyramid Age. And there are smaller cycles within that the larger cycle. But what's amazing is that the Mayan scientists, I'm going to call them, you can call them priests, but they were definitely very astute astronomers, observers of the heavenly bodies, and they knew with quite a bit of precision that the Earth's that 365.24, they took it out that far. Exactly why is open to interpretation. They knew the transit and the cycles of Venus, and they followed that very closely. But they also knew about the solar cycles. And we haven't really been thinking about that much in our civilization. I mean, we look at the 11-year sunspot cycle, but not really thinking in terms of, does the sun have longer cycles? And the Maya, when they projected 2012, they seem to have known that would be, a solar maximum, and which I find to be fascinating, really, because the Maya civilization ended 1,000 years ago. So we're dealing with things from a very sophisticated civilization that, I mean, I would not claim to understand, and we don't have a lot of their documents because they were burned, but we have some. So the coinciding of 2012 with the solar maximum, and also next year there's a transit of Venus.
That's right.
And I found, pardon?
Oh yeah, I just said that's right. We had the transit of Venus in 2012. We had the previous one in 2004, about 8 years between them, I think it is.
That's right, and that's what I've been doing research on, and what I found was Krakatoa exploded during the transit there in 1883, I think it was. There was a transit of Venus, and that's when Krakatoa exploded. Now, in 2004, there was, like you just said, there was a transit, and in that same area, we had the tsunami.
Yes.
So there are these, these relationships between things, and then, as you just mentioned earlier, we have comets to add into the mix now. And the Mayan calendar system, this was called, this age was called the age of motion, the sun of motion, and they said it would end in earthquakes and the impact from a cosmic body. So that's what we have to go on.
And will we have at the bottom of at the root of this, obviously, the transition of also then of what they call the fourth sun into the fifth sun, and what does that, from your perspective and as far as you've understood things, what does that mean exactly?
Well, it means that there's a transformation of consciousness, of society, of the way we're operating, and I think if we do go through this period of, people call it purification or transformation, whatever you want to call it, we can I think people around the world are sensing there's a build-up towards something, and there's a little bit of anxiety with it right now, and none of us know exactly what's going to happen, but it seems like we have some of the tools, like with alternative energy and with a lot of things that have been developed but not implemented, and I would think that we're going to see the implementation of these things in the fifth sun, in after 2012. But it's only the beginning. You know what I mean? It's only the beginning of a new period.
We have,
and I think we'll see. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. I want to say we have seen some interesting things happening on the sun just in the past year here now. Will, we've seen a tremendous. We've seen solar tsunamis, I think that they call them. We have seen an incredible explosion here just a few months ago, I think it was.
That's right.
With
huge explosion.
Huge explosion with you could see plasma raining down back onto the sun, and I've never seen anything like it, and I don't think the scientists who were observing the sun have either. Talk a little bit about that, Will, and what you think that this means. Is this a build-up we're seeing there?
Yeah, I think this is, this is exactly what the Mayan were pointing towards, that the sun is kind of at the end of a cycle, and we're watching, some kind of a metamorphosis, and I think what we're going to see is actually less solar activity after this, which is going to bring on a cooler period. And the good thing about a cooler period, there's a lot of bad things about it. A good thing is that people usually don't go to war, and there won't be so much wasting of energy and so on. But those are we can talk about that more later. But in terms of the increased solar activity, yeah, we've seen some of the, the largest solar flares and CMEs and stuff that, since 1859, when that one would have shut out the lights.
Yeah.
If it hit now, that same event, which is quite possible, would have just shut out the lights of civilization that quickly. What's amazing to me is that it's so simple. It's such a simple thing, and yet the consequences will be devastating.
That's right. It's we have that example, as you alluded to, the telegraph system basically being fried. 1859, a massive solar outbreak. let's put that in perspective and discuss a little bit what you think would happen if we had a similar event today then, Will.
Well, what would happen is, the transformers get overloaded. They would melt down, explode and everything, and it would just shut the grid down. It would happen quickly, and then, what happens when the lights go out, that's one thing, and it's actually the smallest thing. The next things would be all the telecommunications, all of the satellites would be knocked out. All the telecommunications would be knocked out. People's, and then on a personal level, the refrigerator goes down and your food rots within 2 days. The water is, at least in this country, it's based on electricity, the way it gets delivered. So you have this cascading negative effects, that as soon as people can't get water, you're going to panic. It won't take long at all. And then the food issue will come up, and disease, because, the garbage collection's not happening, because, gasoline is also delivered using electricity. So we're just talking about something that would, just ripple through the global environment. Now, it doesn't necessarily have to impact the entire world, because there was one that hit Canada. I don't remember the exact year, and it zapped, I think it was Ottawa. It knocked it out for part of a day. So, it could hit one area, it could hit one country, or it could be larger.
It depends, I guess, Will, on the fact if it's directly, Earth, if the flare is directly Earth directed, basically, and even depending on the sensitivity of the grid. And the question is, and this is all question marks at this point, as to how quickly could this be restored, or we're talking about a few different parts in the grid that just basically needs to be replaced. But in any regard, whatever we're talking about, if this is a scenario that potentially is going to happen or unfold, if nothing else, we're talking probably maybe a few days in certain areas where the grid might go down, and that's maybe the best case scenario. What do you think, Will?
Yeah, I think you're right. That would be the best case scenario. Worst case would be, that it shuts down a very large area, which would be, where are you going to get all these transformers are huge. I'm not so sure that they have a backlog of them that would be needed, the numbers that would be needed, because the transformers would be ruined. So it's just a lot of practical problems, that it would take quite a while to get it back up and running. We could be talking months. It could even be talking a year or two. There's just so many factors. What would, if it goes on even for weeks, right? Imagine when people finally realized that life changed very suddenly, we've got canned food and rice and beans and all of those things to survive on, but the issue would be water. The key issue would be, how do you get water to people? During that period, and I don't think anybody has an answer to that.
I was thinking about electricity in cold, places like here up in the, northern hemisphere, up in Scandinavia for us here, if it's winter time.
Yeah.
A lot of places have obviously throughout history had great means to heat their houses with, wood stoves and things like that. But in many regards, these have been outdated, and we just have the electricity, socket, powered radiators these days. Very, very stupid when you think about it. Just,
yes, it is.
As a backup system. It's incredible, isn't it?
Yes, it is. I find it's very frustrating, really, that we've just, as a race, abandoned things that worked in the past, embracing this future without thinking it through. That, to go totally on electromagnetism when the sun really controls it and can shut us down at any time was pretty foolish.